you'll be able to present, like, we've already giving you permission to share your
We are
screen
live now.
already. All
Ella, we are
right.
live.
All right.
So,
Okay, welcome everyone. Okay. All right. Welcome everyone. So for those of us just joining, you can drop a comment on the here on Twitch, and also please drop on Discord so we'll have more persons joining the call. I think we just have 8 people and we have more persons. And already your instructor is already here. So Joseph Kuri. Sorry, I don't know if I pronounced that well, Joseph. Joseph Kuri.
Yeah, that's correct.
Am I correct? All right. Okay. Thank you so much. Okay. So yeah, Joseph, I think you can start. You can start. So you can share your screen and start the class.
Okay, fantastic. Give me 1 second, and then we just share. Okay, 1 second, let me just share my screen very quick.
All right. Okay. Okay. So while everyone will wait for our instructor to share his screen, please make sure you drop a message on our Discord community so we have more persons. I think we just have 9 people on Discord and we have a lot of people on the UI UX track. So please drop a message on the Discord channel so we'll have more persons joining the call. Thank you. And welcome once again for everyone joining. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So please make sure you pay attention, and at the end of the class, you can ask your instructor questions. So there's going to be room for questions. So please, when your instructor eventually starts the class, please make sure you pay attention, and at the end of the class, we'll take questions.
Yeah, sorry guys, 1 second. Just taking some time to upload this.
Okay, all right. Okay, there's no problem. Okay, and some persons, we are streaming this live on Twitch and also streaming this live on YouTube. So some persons are also on the YouTube channel. Okay, welcome, welcome everyone. All right. Okay, Joseph, are you able to share your screen? Are you able to present?
Yes, I'm just about to upload the PDFs because I'm having some issues with sharing my screen. So give me 1 second.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much.
Should be done soon.
Okay, so while we wait for Joseph to present, I'll just briefly just talk about Joseph. Okay, so Joseph Kuri is a UI UX designer at User Hub Africa Limited. He's a UI UX expert and is based in Ghana. So today he's going to be taking us on our very, very, very first class on learn design principles. So please make sure you pay attention and listen attentively. Thank you.
Yes, hi everybody. So yeah, so I'm currently uploading the slides for you to see. But yes, nice to meet
Okay.
everybody here. So yes, I think it should be up now. Okay. Okay. This is my first time on Twitch, so I'm trying to get familiar with everything.
Oh, yeah. All right.
Yeah, because I have my slides up, but it's not showing on the screen.
Hold on.
Oh, there it is. Oh, perfect. There it is.
Okay, yes.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to this first class. So, as I said, my name is Joseph Abekuri. So I will be taking you through learning design principles. So just a little bit background about myself. So yes, my name is Joseph Kuri. I'm currently the CEO of User Hub Africa. So User Hub, we're a startup who focuses on market and user research, and we're also into digital marketing. And I'm also a UX UI designer as well. I got my bachelor's from University of Houston in Texas, and got a master's in Ghana. So I actually worked at Flutterwave in 2017. Worked there as a UX designer, and then I transitioned to a business development manager afterwards. And in 2021, I worked at Jetstream Africa. So Jetstream, it's a tech logistics company which is based in Ghana. So I worked there for a year and a half as a senior UX designer. And lastly, I also run a tech platform called technovaga.com, which is a tech news platform. It's kind of similar to Tech Cabal in Nigeria. So yes, that's just a little bit about me. Yeah, so I think we can go ahead and just get started. So one thing about UX is that people are asking what exactly is UX. So if we had to basically give a definition of what UX is, which is stands for user experience, it's basically trying to understand users in a way, trying to understand what they need, what they value, their abilities, their limitations. So when we're doing UX design, we're trying to basically um, create products that provide meaningful and relevant experiences. So we're trying to also take into account the business goals. So because we're not designing in a vacuum, we're trying to design for a business. We're trying to create value for the business and create relevant experience for the users who in turn pay for the product that we give them. So that's basically UX in a nutshell. One thing that usually happens in the UX field is that people are always asking, well, what is UX? What is UI? Because it does tend to get confused sometimes in a way. But to break it down, it's not that hard actually to break it down. UI design or just UI is basically just the interface. So whenever you hear somebody say that they are a UI designer, what they do is basically just designing the user interface. So for instance, if you go to a website and you look at the visual aspects of everything, that's basically the user interface. The goal of the user interface is just to guide you through the product. So if you ever use an app like Uber or Bolt or any other mobile application, you're looking at the user interface of the product. So using the product, that UI design encompasses the brand's visual assets. So the logo, the colors, just anything that makes it just pleasing to the eye. So if you had to talk about the difference between UI and UX in a nutshell is that UI is just more focused on how it looks. And the UX design is more about the entire spectrum of the user experience. So basically, UI design falls under UX. So if you ever hear somebody say, what's UI, UX, just know that UI fits into UX in a way. And that even comes down to the roles that's happen in UX design. So what thing that happens in UX design is that there are different roles. So I always say that I'm a UI UX designer, and that means that I do certain things. But if you're breaking down the roles in UX UI design, there's different roles. So somebody may say that they're a UX designer. Somebody may say that, oh, they are a UI designer, a product designer. They also do interaction design. They are a UX writer, UX researcher. And the last thing is a UX unicorn. So these are just varying roles that come across that you hear sometimes. Nowadays, people don't say I'm a UX designer. They say, oh, I'm a UX writer or I'm a UX researcher. So yes, UX is very, very vast. It covers many, many fields. So not just one particular role. So now we have to talk about why is even UX important. You have noticed that over the years that UX is becoming a bigger field in Africa, especially. We have different groups in Ghana, Nigeria, and across Africa where now people are asking about or companies are hiring UX designers now. Before that, it wasn't as big. Usually, what companies used to focus on was hiring more developers. But now UX is coming to its own. Now it's a big deal. So the question is, why is even UX important? So a study done by Forrester Research said that 70% of projects usually fail because of lack of user acceptance. And that's usually because the UX design of that particular product wasn't done well. So if we had to look at why UX is important, it's because it can help actually boost um, customer acquisition. So over the years, companies are now focusing on trying to, delight the customer, make sure the customer has the best user experience possible. Because if an app or a product is good enough or has one of the best UX experiences, they tend to stay longer and use the product more often. And that also tends to boost the product's relevance or even attract new customers. And good UX also maximizes revenue because if the customer is satisfied with a product, they're usually willing to pay more for it or even evangelize. So they'll tell other people that this app I'm using is very good. It has various UX components that they find delightful, and they can actually help and even push um, other people to download the app or use the product. And also, if you have UX designers which are good on your company or your team, they can actually help keep development costs in check. Usually, what happens in some companies, they usually hire a developer who does both the design and the development, and they may not be as experienced in the design. So what tends to happen is they might design a product once, they have to code it and then send it to the market, and then users say this app is not as good enough. So now they have to come back, redo everything, or find out why the product is not being accepted. So if you have good UX designers, what they do is they do the entire process of UX design. They do the research, they do the design, wireframing, which I'll talk about that later. They do everything all at once, and then they pass it on to the developers who only job is to just code the app and then develop it and then put it on the marketplace. So yes, these are just various importances for UX, why it's important now in the field. So next, I just want to talk about some principles when it comes to UX. One thing you have to know, especially, is very important that when it comes to UX, it's all about the users. The end users are the most important person in UX design. It's not about you. It's not about what you feel or what you like about the product. It's about who you're designing for. And I just listed some components or some principles here. Just four of them, which are important, I think, is user-centered design, user research, information architecture, and accessibility. So I said before that user-centered design is very important because we're putting the focus on the user. We want to find out what delights the user. We want to find out how best to make sure they like a certain product. User research helps with that. User research basically does that research for you to find out who our users are, what they like, what they don't like, how best to design the application. The information architecture is basically about how to structure something on an application or website. If you've ever been to just any normal website, you know that on the top is the menu field. In the middle of the screen is maybe the hero section, and then in between is text, pictures, various components. And at the bottom is usually like the footer. So that's basically information architecture. Same thing applies to mobile applications. You know that there's going to be a menu on the app, either at the bottom or the top or hidden in the hamburger menu. And then you have maybe the main screen or things like that. And lastly, there's accessibility, which has become very important nowadays. I know many of you probably have like Netflix or something like that. You notice that maybe when you're watching a particular show, you can activate something called closed captionings. And those closed captionings help maybe a non-English speaker understand the show, what they're saying on the show, but that's an accessibility design. So we're trying to actually incorporate things for users who may be visually impaired or maybe deaf. So it does have some components you add in that. Also, other accessibility designs include maybe changing the font, having accessibility to zoom in to the application or your website. So this is just a couple of principles when we're incorporating our UX design. And what I want to talk about next is something called user personas. So if we're talking about persona, maybe you heard about this before. A persona is basically a fictional character that is used to represent a user type. Maybe when we're designing a website or a brand or a product, we always use a persona to basically know who we're designing for. So I listed a couple of personas below. So an example I'm giving here is we're trying to design an app for hair appointments. So if we're designing an app for hair appointments, basically who are our personas for that app? And I've listed this a couple of examples. So maybe I can say women who work in entertainment. So if we're designing a persona for women who work in entertainment, I can say maybe I can give that person a name. I can say that person is Bridget. Her name is Bridget. She works in entertainment. She does movies or film, and maybe she's 22 years old. And we can list out her characteristics. We can list out things that she likes, her hobbies, things like that. So we can list out that persona because what happens, it gives you an idea of who we're designing for. Anyway, I've listed some other personas, barbershop owners, salon owners as well. So when we're listing out the personas, we're breaking them down to say, who is this person? Who am I designing for? What do they like? What they don't like specifically for this use case, which is hair appointments. So one of the another important aspects for user design or UX design is something called UX research. Over the years, UX research has becoming a bit more mainstream. I think before that, what used to happen was designers tend to use or just go into their design tools and start designing almost immediately. But now data and research has become very important. So what is user research? So it's just basically about designing, generating insights about your users, their behaviors, motivations, and needs. And there's two main ways that we conduct user research. One is called the quantitative research, and one is called the qualitative research. So I'll break those two down in the next couple of slides. So quantitative research, that's basically collecting and analyzing numerical data. So how do we basically start that research? So there's various ways. Two of the ways that I've highlighted here are web or mobile analytics. I don't know if anybody here has used Google Analytics for their websites, but if you have used that, you know that it gives you certain information about visitors to your website. So you can basically see where your visitors are coming from. You can see who has clicked on what page or what link. So it's giving you basically an insight into what your users are clicking. It's giving you a numerical data or data field for, okay, who has clicked on what. And that same thing applies to maybe your mobile application. So maybe you know that, okay, maybe on today, 10 users logged into your application or 10 users clicked on a specific application. So you're basically trying to get that research, or you can use it maybe online surveys. So on online surveys, basically, you can put a link to your website or mobile application to get insights. So maybe you can put in maybe a rating system. So you can say, okay, here's a rate. How would you rate this particular website or this particular app out of 5 stars? So basically, when they do those ratings or those analytics, you can see, okay, if maybe 20 people have rated your website, averagely it's 3 stars, you can say, okay, that means you wanted to get to 5 stars. So you can now say that, okay, we need to get to 5 stars. You can show your internal stakeholders that our app is currently rated at 3 stars out of 5. How do we get that number up? Maybe we need to work on more research to find out maybe what pain points can we fix. In the next slide, I will talk about qualitative research because that can actually give you more insights to how best to actually get more insights to to make your app better. So what is qualitative research? And that basically involves methods to help reveal behavior and perception of your target audience. So what this entails is basically more face-to-face with your user base. So you can do various ways. There are various ways of doing qualitative research. You can do one-on-one interviews. So that basically you're talking to your users one-on-one. So you're trying to gain insights. You're asking various questions about how they feel about your applications, how they use your applications, what are their current pain points, what they like about the app, what they don't like about that app. And when you gather all that information, that gives you clear insights to how to maybe fix your application or make it better. So if you, for instance, you're talking to a user and they tell you that they're having difficulty logging in, they're having difficulty onboarding, that can actually give you insight that maybe you need to go back to the drawing board and actually redesign your onboarding feature, your sign-up feature. And there are other ways of qualitative research. That's focus groups. You're talking to a wide range of users, maybe 5 or 6 in the room. You want to get their insights on a particular product. You want to get their insights on what they like about their application or website, things like that. And lastly, there's usability testing. So usability testing is basically you have designed your app, you've taken out the market, and you want to see how the user interacts with it. So this gives you a first-hand knowledge of how your users are using your website. So maybe you may design, let's go back to our hair salon app example. So now you design the app, you're giving to users, you want to find out how they log in, how do they interact with the application. If they want to book an appointment, you can see how they're actually interacting with it. And you can see basically their pain points or maybe their satisfaction rates. Okay, maybe they're having trouble logging in. You can see, okay, maybe you have to redesign that feature. They're having problems booking a hair salon. Okay, that's another insight to, okay, maybe I need to go back and redesign the booking application feature. So things like that. So these two components, which is the qualitative and the quantitative, helps you give a better insight to how best to actually design your application and also make it better going forward. So if you've noticed, I've talked about user personas, I've talked about user research, and that means we haven't even touched designing of the application. Because usually what sometimes designers tend to do is we want to rush and immediately open Figma and start designing. But we need to go through some certain principles or processes. Like we need to define who our users are. We did not do a UX research. And then before we come into what we call here wireframing and prototyping. So what is wireframing? So wireframing is basically you're building a skeleton of your website or your mobile application. That's the process where designers design an overview of or the structure or the flow for a possible website or application. So it's basically designing a skeleton. We're not designing it using colors. We're not designing using logos or things like that. We're designing just a skeleton. So if we're designing, for instance, maybe we're designing a login process, we're just designing, okay, maybe the text field, we're designing the button, then we're seeing, okay, if we're going from the button to maybe the login field or the sign up field or the home screen, how does that work? So we're designing a skeleton of that application or website. So we're just doing something called wireframe. We're not doing high fidelity. So wireframing is usually called low fidelity because it involves just no colors, no logos, just straight up skeleton design. And then that comes to even the prototyping. So you can design a set of wireframes and then you can do something called prototyping. That is basically showing how the flow of that wireframe works. So basically, if a user is going through the process of sign up, getting onto the home screen, we will prototype that. We're just doing a mock-up to see that, okay, if a user presses this button or a user presses this button, or maybe they sign up, what does that process look like? Things like that. So that's basically wireframing and prototyping. So once we're done with that, once we have, so okay, let me step back. So usually in companies where the design is, we can wireframe and prototype. And we usually, what we do is we show them to our internal stakeholders. So that could be your product manager, that could be your CEO or somebody. So just to confirm that, okay, this is what the application will look like. Hold on. Can anybody hear me? Can everybody hear me? I think somebody was saying that they can't hear. If everybody can hear me, I think I'll just keep on going. Okay, perfect. Okay, so yes, so that's basically wireframing and prototyping. So yes, we want to make sure that we get the wireframing right, because in companies, and some of the companies I work for, we've had to go back and forth with wireframe design because we want to make sure that we're getting just the basics right. Because if we don't get the basics, once we leave the wireframing process, we're now going to design a full-fledged app. And we don't want to get to the point where we design the app with all the logos and colors, and then we have to go back again and redesign something. We want to make sure we get it right. So that's what happens with usability testing. So we can do wireframing and prototyping, and then we test it. So what is usability testing? That's basically the practice of testing how a design will work with a specific group of people. So yeah, so when we're doing usability testing, we can start with the wireframing. So we can take this app that we've done, which is the wireframing and the prototyping, and we can say, give it to the users and say, we want to test how you use the app when signing up. So we're testing how they sign up. We're observing them. We're seeing, okay, what struggles do they run into? How the flow works when they're using it in real time. We can see, okay, maybe what works, what doesn't work. And then when we get those insights, we take it back to our design board and say, okay, the user may have been having issues with signing up. They may have been having issues using a specific feature. How do we redesign that to make sure that we incorporate those pain points? And through the usability testing phase, we're also asking the users questions, what they liked, what was their pain points, what did they struggle with? Because once we get those insights, we can go back to the drawing board and say, we need to come back to the wireframing and also then redesign the specific process. So once we do that and come back and use the test again, and maybe that current pain point that they had, now they can see that, oh, this works now for me. I can go through this process. I can sign up. I can do this specific feature. Then we can say, okay, now we can go full force and excuse me, we can go full force and now design it in high fidelity. That's basically now we're going to use our colors. We're going to use our logos. We're going to do a full-fledged design of our application. So that's basically wireframing, prototype, and then user testing in a nutshell. And lastly, I want to come and talk about the tools of the trade, which is basically our design tools. I just want to emphasize something when it comes to UX design. I think there's this kind of trend that everybody wants to, be the best at a particular tool or set of tools. Because what tends to happen is that everybody wants to become a Figma expert. They want to become an expert at XD. But I want to just specify and say that it's not about the tools when you're designing. It's more about knowing the processes. So I've listed some processes before. I've talked about, user personas, knowing our personas, UX research, before we even come now to actual designing and testing. So some tools of the trade I've listed here are pen and paper. I think pen and paper is like the most basic thing you can use when designing, because even before you even touch your laptop or go into Figma and start designing, it's always best to use pen and paper to actually draw out, to sketch out what you want, because it gives you can actually play around and experiment with design on pen and paper. You can do the same with Figma if you want, but for me personally, I like to do pen and paper because it's way easier, it's faster to do. But yes, there's the design tools are out there. Figma is the biggest name we know, Sketch as well, Adobe XD. With Miro is kind of a whiteboard solution. So Miro basically is used by designers, but also researchers. So what they can do with Miro is they can actually put all their ideas on Miro. So basically, let me give you an example, for instance. At Jetstream, use Miro when we're working on a new feature for research. So we're trying to design and this puts our data points on this whiteboard. So we're trying to take insights from users, our user research, specific quotes, things like that. And then we're trying to put it on one specific application. And then once we synthesize it, our product manager gets involved, and then they can look at it and maybe point out some things from the research, things like that. The same thing can be with FigJam. FigJam is a new feature by Figma. It's kind of the same thing as whiteboarding with UX design. So you can use FigJam to do the same thing. You can take your research, you can experiment with designs, you can design flows, things like that. So you can use the same with FigJam. And of course, Unsplash, it's a free stock. website. So basically, if you want to maybe get maybe stock images for your applications, you can always see, or maybe you've seen various images on websites or mobile applications and it looks similar. That's because most of them are using free stock images to basically use in their designs. So yes, tools of the trade, just want to iterate and say that tools are good, but remember, they're just tools. They're just trying to use various things to actually make your design better. You don't have to stick to one particular tool because maybe if you use Figma in one company, you may go to another company and they may be using Sketch. So you don't necessarily have to be a Sketch or a Figma expert. You just have to know the basics for using design. So I think I've covered most of the principles when it comes to UX design. Like I said, user-centered design is always about the users. User research is very important, information architecture and accessibility. So yes, you need to incorporate or know about all these features and functions when it comes to learning UX design. The personas, the UX research, the quantitative and qualitative. It's always good to know or design a UX research before you even start designing, because nowadays everybody wants to jump headfirst into design, but not focus on gathering data about their personas or doing the research, which is very, very important. And also the wireframing and prototyping as well, and then the usability testing. So I think to summarize in a way, I talked about UX and UI and how they're not the same. Basically just remember that UI falls under UX. Basically just one of the principles of or the fields of UX. There's like I mentioned before, there's UX research, there's UI designing, interaction designing, UX writing. Yeah, so just remember that UX is not UI. UI just falls under components of UX. And also remember, it's about the users. It doesn't matter if you are a fan of a particular design. What it comes down to always is about the user. What do they like? What are their pain points? How do I design for them? Making sure that they are satisfied in the entire process. And also do your research. Apply your principles, user experience design, user-centered design, user research, accessibility design, information hierarchy, things like that. Also, remember, if you want to design, you always have to design, test, and design again, because your design is never going to be perfect. Designs are never perfect. You're always designing, making sure you're improving on the next design. I mean, if you look at most of the Fortune 500 companies like Microsoft, Uber, Google, they're always designing, they're always testing. They're always, coming up with a new UI. I think yesterday Spotify redesigned their application for a new homepage, because they're always testing. They're always trying to get insight. They're doing their research. So never get stuck on design. Always try to improve on it. And lastly, remember that tools are just tools. You don't have to be, a fave of one tool. You can use various tools for your design. So yes, tools are just tools. Don't get stuck on wanting to be a Figma expert or a Sketch expert. Always try to know what tools are best for what you're trying to do. Whether it's research, UI design, prototyping, things like that. So yes, those are just some summary points from the main presentation. But I think that covers everything. So I'm seeing some questions already in the chat. I don't know if I should start answering them.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Joseph. So people are already dropping questions. So I don't know if you can see it. You can start taking them. So please, everyone, you can start dropping your questions for your instructors so they can be answered. Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay. So Joseph, do you want to take the questions?
oh, you can put them on the screen and I can just answer them. Okay. So somebody's
All right.
asking.
Okay. So I guess.
Yeah. If yeah, I
Okay.
can.
Yeah. So
I'll
you
just
can
go
take
ahead
them.
and answer.
Thank you.
Yes, so I'll just answer the questions. So somebody's asking if they want to master the principal designs. Um, they can make any use of tools, no matter how complex they are. Yes, you can do it. So I mentioned before that there's a tool. There are different fields for UX designing. So there's something called an interaction designer. So Figma, for instance, has, for instance, prototyping, animated prototyping. But if you want to be an interaction designer, you probably use a different tool when it comes to designing interactions. Some websites or some prototypes or some apps would require you to do custom interaction design. For instance, if you looked at the Uber app, Uber has different interaction designs. So maybe they would use a tool like I think Adobe Animate or Adobe Effects. So they will design those interactions in that specific tool. So if you want to be good in that, you probably would want to use that tool and not necessarily Figma. But yes, you can use like UI when it comes to UI design. You can definitely use Figma for your UI design. You can use Sketch, Adobe XD just for that. So yes, you can use this plain tools or anything like that. Okay, I think somebody's asking. Okay, somebody's asking what's the difference between UI, UX design and graphic design. So graphic design is more about graphical interfaces. So it's more about you're not necessarily you can actually there's kind of an overlap. So when it like I mentioned before, there are UI and UX. So UI is more focused on how it looks and feels. So graphic designing is more about, let's say, for example, you're designing maybe a poster or a flyer or something for an event. You can also incorporate or use maybe Figma to design that same thing. But the difference is that the user is not going to interact with that graphic. They're going to see it and get certain information from it and then just use it to their best of their knowledge. With the UI designing, you are now going to design something that a user can use, if that makes sense. So if you're designing maybe a website, you know that the user is going to interact with that specific design. So they're going to use the buttons, they're going to press links, things like that. With the graphics, they're not going to use that user interface. They're just going to look at it and just give you, or just get some information from it. Hope that makes sense. Okay, somebody was asking about principle to design. So I showed it on the screen here. I hope you can see it. Somebody's asking about which is the best tool to use for, hold on a second, best tool to use for designing. So again, it depends on your use case. So in many companies, like I said before, I know Microsoft, for instance, uses Figma exclusively for their designs. I think some companies also use Figma as well. But really, it's just knowing about how each of these UI design tools work. Because Sketch has basically the same principles of Figma. So if you know how to use Sketch, you can basically use Figma. Same thing as Adobe XD. So it really depends on your use case. Another question, somebody's asking about, is it necessary to know about HTML and CSS? So one of the questions in the UX field is that should designers learn to code? And the best answer I can give is that it's more about learning about the basics of HTML and CSS. And the reason you need to learn about the basics is because sometimes you want to design a specific mobile interface. You want to maybe design some interactions. You need to know that what are the limitations when it comes to coding that UI or that interaction. So it's always best to know that, can my developer always know how to design this interaction in HTML or CSS? That's very important to know. So yes, I would say it's not about knowing how to code. It's more about knowing about the basic principles. Somebody is asking about quantitative research. Okay, let's go back. So quantitative research is basically about, it's more like analytics, for instance. So I just posted 2 ways of knowing about how to do analytics, quantitative research. That is the web or mobile analytics or the online surveys. So an example I gave was maybe designing for websites. if you're designing a website, you want to know specific data fields to improve your website. So if you design a website, you want to know how many people are clicking on a specific page, you can have that analytics behind on your website. Now, if you want to get maybe 100 users clicking on a link that day, and there's only 40 users on that day, you want to find out why is that happening. So you want to know, or you can see the data, you don't know why that happens, or you want to know how many users are coming to your website on that day. Because if you know those numbers or that data, you know that, okay, maybe you're improving on your website, people are coming to your page. Because if you design a website and nobody's coming, your website is not getting views. So what's the point of that? You want to know how many people are coming, are we improving, are we gaining numbers? Because those numbers can help you actually know that maybe your product is working. Hope that helped answer that question. Somebody's asking, how do we have to make use of all the tools for designing, or just use one tool for the job? You don't have to make use of all the tools. If you are, for instance, a UI designer, you just need to know maybe just Figma or Sketch or Adobe XD, because those are just like design tools. So you can use this, just maybe if you know the principles of Sketch, you can use Figma, because it depends on your job. Okay, somebody's asking, is there a difference between product design, UI, and UX? So at the beginning of the lecture, I said that there are different fields. So there's difference between UI, UX in the first place. I just said UI is more focused on how a product looks and how it feels. And UX design is more about the entire spectrum. So basically encompassing UI design, encompasses research, and encompasses writing, things like that. Now, product design is more of understanding how a product works and how it fits a business, or how to make revenue for the business. So if somebody's a product designer, they basically have to learn about everything that entails with the product. So basically the marketing, the business model for the product, incorporating the research for the product, everything about that specific product. So marketing, revenue, UI design, the research, everything about the product. So a product designer is basically covering that specific product. If somebody is a product designer, they're more focused on, maybe if somebody, for instance, is a product designer of Uber, that means they're focusing on how to make money for Uber, how to research for Uber, how to design for Uber. Just that all-encompassing thing. But yes, I hope that helped answer the question. Somebody's asking how to use pen and paper to build an idea of a design. Is it like a drawing? So yes, you can basically sketch out like the idea for an application. So you can actually sketch out, for instance, how a new application, for an example I used was designing a hair salon, or a booking app for a hair salon, or hair appointments. So you can use pen and paper to sketch that out. So you can actually write and design. So you can write, okay, who are my users? Why? What does the app do? How do I make money for the app? Things like that. And you can even sketch out how the app would look. So you can design like the interface for that application. You can just sketch it out. You can draw out how many menu fields to have. You can draw out how would you want it to look like. So you're sketching it out, everything, before you even jump onto like a tool like Figma or even Sketch, for instance. Okay. So Manu was asking, designing an app, you need to have insight on what you want to create. Somebody is asking, is it okay to look out from other works or create yours? Yes, you can actually look, for instance, if you're in a specific sector, let's say you're in fintech, for instance, and you're designing a payment app. So you can actually look at what the other payment apps are doing. But if you're designing a unique feature for your payment app, now you have to incorporate maybe a user research. So again, you have to know who are your users. So you have to sketch out the personas. And you know that people are going to be log into your app, making payments, things like that. So you want to get maybe unique insights. So you want to talk to users. Like if you're designing maybe, let's say you're designing a buy now, pay later app, for instance. So now you want to get unique insights. How do people buy products currently? And if they want to buy now and pay later, what would be the best use case for that? Would they use their bank, Will they use mobile money? Things like that. So you need to get those insights on how to create that specific application you want to design for. You can get inspiration from other applications, absolutely. But if it's a special unique case, you need to design or research about your app first. Okay, somebody's asking, is quantitative research necessary for a new product? I would say yes, it's necessary because you don't know what's out on the marketplace and you don't know the numbers. So quantitative research are basically trying to find out, okay, I'm trying to give an example. So let's say you're designing, let's go back to our hair appointment application. So the quantitative, you can ask how many users or have they ever downloaded a hair appointment app before? So if the numbers come back and it's like, okay, maybe a minority or a majority have not used a hair application app before, that gives you an insight. Okay, maybe there's not enough hair application apps on the market. So maybe you can get that. Or you can actually do a survey. Okay, what's their best application they've used? How would they rate it? Things like that. So all that is just good data points for your new application to get. So yes, you can actually create different quantitative research about users, about different applications for any product. So depending on your product, you want to know insights like, is that product exist on the market? Are users using it? What's their best application? Or how would they rate it? Things like that. Somebody's asking how do you gain experience in user research for your portfolio? Basically, you have to, if you are a beginner, I would say that you should think about doing a side project, or you want to do a specific project with somebody else. So you want to basically start a project and start conducting research for that specific product you're building. So now you're designing maybe qualitative research, so you want to know the numbers. You're designing a qualitative research, so you want to interview people for your application. So once you design that, you get a data pack. Now you want to actually put on your portfolio what were the outcomes for that specific research. I hope that makes sense. Okay, Mano was asking about throw more light on the interactions and animations for Adobe XD. And must you learn Adobe XD to be a good UI designer? So the animations interactions for this, let's say Adobe XD, I haven't used it in a while, so I can't tell you what the advances are, but I'm sure that they're kind of akin to what Figma is using as far as prototyping animations. So like I said before, like Uber, if you ever use the Uber app, you can see that there's different interaction designs. When you call a car, you can see how it actually interacts. It shows you the directions for that. Now, of course, if you want, you can actually also just try and design it in Figma or Adobe XD, but specific applications like Adobe Effects can actually be a little more helpful or actually help you design that specific interaction. So yes, you don't necessarily need to know Adobe XD to be a good UI designer, but you need to know the basics. How do you design an app? How do you design a menu button? How do you design sliders? How do you design a map? Things like that. Just the basic principles can actually help you be a good UI designer, but you can practice in those specific applications. Okay, somebody's asking that they want more clarity on personas. Okay, so I said personas are basically fictional characters that represents your user type. So the example I used here was designing an app for hair appointments. So if you're designing an app for hair appointments, you have to know who are the users going to use this app. So basically, they can be barbershop owners. So what does a typical or average barbershop owner look like? What are their pain points? How do they want to improve their experience as far as booking clients for their shop? Another example was saloon owners. What does a typical saloon owner look like? So you have to build out that persona. What's their average age? What are they looking forward to building, or how do they want to advance their business? What are their current pain points? So you are building this fictional character who would be representative for that specific user you're building for. Yes, hope that helps answer that question. Somebody's asking, as a novice, how can it be easier to understand and learn UI and UX? So I think you guys are very lucky because nowadays there's various resources like this one, for instance, to learn UI UX. If you go to YouTube and you just click Learn UI UX, you get dozens of videos explaining what UX is, how to get started, how to build a product, how to design in Figma, how to design in Adobe XD, how to design in Sketch. So yes, there's various resources. So I would recommend that you go online and read about case studies, for instance, how people build their applications. Go learn from YouTube how people are designing now, just different things like that. Wireframing and prototyping. Okay, so wireframing and prototyping, I said before, it's wireframing is basically you're building a skeleton of a website or application. So with wireframing, you're kind of just making an outline in a way. You're not using maybe your company's logos or even using colors. You're designing the outline for how the application would look. Maybe you're designing the outline for how a user would log in, how they would sign up, how they would use a feature in the app. And then the prototyping is basically saying that we want to put all those components together. So how does a user go from the login process to the home screen to maybe even the logout? So you're designing that prototype. So yes, you're designing that prototype and how everything flows together. What button do they press to log in? What button do they press to log out? Things like that. So that's different. So wireframing is just building that static, and the prototyping is being more a bit animated. How would everything flow? Hope that helps answer that question. Okay, somebody's asking, what is the use of UX tools? Okay, why is the use of UX tools to design website necessary and not design them on a CMS like WordPress, Elementor, or host them directly on the web? So I would say it's necessary because if you, for instance, just jump into like a CMS like WordPress, Elementor, now you have to figure out where do I put certain buttons, where do I put the header, or where do I put the footer, things like that. If you're using a design tool, it makes it easier because again, you're designing for a specific user and the users has certain expectations. So the reason they're using a design tool is because you want to structure out how it would look for that end user. And when we structure it out, then we're going to test. Because if I just decide to jump into Elementor, now I have to figure out, okay, would they like the button at this position? Would they like the button at that position? Um, is the footer the right color? Things like that. When you design the outline or the sketch or the prototype or the wireframing for that website, then you can test with the user. You can get their feedback. Do they like this? How would they interact with certain elements on this thing? And then when you're done, or when you're dissatisfied with that specific design in the UX tool, then you can go into Elementor and say, okay, now I want to build out what I designed in the UX tool because the user has said that they're satisfied or they like how it flows and how it looks. Because what happens, it saves you time. Because if you go into CMS like Elementor, you're just kind of almost guessing what you think the UI should look like. You're going to go back and forth with the user and it takes too much time. Because once you build a UX tool, they can give you feedback quickly and then you can just do the final design in Elementor. Yes, I hope that helps answer that question. So somebody's asking what's the difference between wireframing and lo-fi? Basically, they're the same. Wireframing is basically the same as lo-fi. Like I said before, wireframing is basically the outline or just a skeleton. So that's a low fidelity. So there's no color, there's no branding, nothing. It's just basic skeleton. So yeah, they kind of overlap. So wireframing can be also referred to as low fidelity design.
So, hi Joseph, thank you so much. I don't think there are any questions here. Guys, if you have a question, please drop your question. If not, would allow Joseph round up with the class. Okay, Joseph, you have just one more question, and after that, we can round up with this class.
Okay. So someone's asking, how do you research if it's a new product? So yeah, so if it's a new product, so again, if it's a new product, the question you always ask is, who are your users for that new product? So I always go back to my example before, as I listed, the appoint book and the app for the hair appointment. So if you're designing that new product on the market, you have to understand who are your new product, who are your new users, who do they look like, um, what are their pain points, what do they need, or what are they looking for. So that's a qualitative research you can actually go with. So if you have that persona, they can go and find out, okay, or you can actually even go ahead and go to hair salons or barbershops and ask them questions. So ask them like, okay, do they have a digital component for their hair salon? How do users book? Do they just walk in? Do they just design? Do they just come in and get a hair appointment? Things like that. So, or do they use maybe they call on the phone? Things like that. So that's basically discovery. You're trying to find out what's on the ground at the moment. So that's a qualitative research at the moment. So you have to ask those questions. Go in on field, ask questions, do the one-on-one interviews, like I said before, or you can do a focus group. You can get like different people in one place, and you can ask them questions. So yes, that's basically the if you're doing research for a new product, you can do a qualitative focus group can be help. One-on-one interviews can also help. And somebody's asking which is the best listed tool for beginners. So like I said, the tool is not as important, but if you had to start, Figma is currently free right now. You can actually use that and test, or you can use maybe Adobe XD because they're both free product. I think Sketch, you get like a 14-day trial and you have to pay for it. But since Figma and XD are free, you can try those. Okay, let me see. The process in each process of design can be fine-tuned. How they admitted that it's a straightforward process. At what point in your career as a designer did you really focus to build on each process in design? Um, so I started out UI designing, and then I went to research because I've worked on products before in the past, and what I noticed was in UI design, what had happened was there was lack of data points when designing. So I'll ask questions like, who are my designers for? And there'll be lack of data points. So one thing I decided that, okay, if I'm going to design or be a full-fledged UX designer, I need to know who am I designing for, what my data points are. Why am I designing this app? How do I know what I'm designing is actually going to work in the field? So I decided to focus on the UX research side because the data is always important because you guys can be designing out of thin air. You need to have some data points. You need to know who you're designing for. As I said in the user personas, who am I designing for? What are the pain points? Things like that. What are the things we can do to pay attention to have a successful design journey? So always be learning. Things are always happening in the design space constantly. There's always new trends. Right now, the new trend is AI. So ChatGPT, things like that, or generative AI, they're now helping to actually augment the design process. So as a designer, you always have to look out for what the new trends are. Can AI actually help in your design? What are the newest trends in UX research? Things like that. No, you always have to learn about or keep reading case studies because again, they can help you to know that what's happening in the field at the moment. We'll learn about case studies from Microsoft, from Google, from Uber. What are they doing when it comes to design? Spotify. Try to find a case study on why they designed their new application. What data points did they use? Things like that. So that will help you in your journey to become a successful UX designer because things are always changing. Design is never stagnant. Things are always happening in the place. So yes, always be learning and always know what the new trends are.
Okay, thank you so much, Joseph. Thank you so much for today's class. And so for everyone, the materials is going to be available after the class. And also, I'm going to Joseph's LinkedIn profile. So please, you can connect with him via LinkedIn. So check on the chat and you can connect with him. can click on the link and send him a connection request if not LinkedIn. Okay, I think that's all. Thank you so much, Joseph, for today's class. We really have to appreciate your instructor for today's class. Thank you so much, Joseph. Please make sure you click on the link, and I'm going to paste that again. Please make sure you send him a connection request and connect with him. Thank you so much. Okay, Mr. Maka, please, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I don't. Thank you so much, Joseph. It was nice hearing from you and listening to your lecture.
Great. Thank you for having me. I hope people learned something today. Yes, I'm really appreciative for the time, and thank you.
All right, thank you. So that
All
will be
right,
all, guys.
thank you.
Bye, everyone. For your questions that were not answered, if you have more questions, you can go ahead and drop them on the Discord server. We'll pick it up from there. So have a nice day, everyone. See you by 8 p.m. today. Bye.
Bye, everyone.